First, we start with our team coverage of the war in Ukraine. We have expert input and the latest from our correspondents, both in Poland and Ukraine, where officials accuse Russia of breaking a ceasefire in the southeastern part of the country. Russia announced it would pause attacks near Volnovakha and Mariupol so that more than 200,000 people could evacuate. But Saturday morning, Ukraine's government said Russian shelling had not stopped. Moscow, however, claims that Ukrainian nationalists are breaking the peace, not Russian forces. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is asking U.S. lawmakers to establish a no-fly zone over his country's airspace, stop oil purchases from Russia, and send additional airplanes to Ukraine. The request was made during a video call with senators and representatives Saturday morning. Right now, Congress is considering $10 billion in emergency funding to send to the war-torn country for humanitarian and security aid. On Saturday, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken stopped in eastern Poland and briefly crossed into the border with Ukraine. He spoke with top Polish officials and met with refugees. While there, he emphasized the United States' commitment to protecting NATO borders and continued support for Ukraine.
Freedom, democracy, peace, security are under threat in this region as never before, certainly not since the Second World War. The people of Poland know how important it is to defend freedom. So do Americans. And we will stand together, as we've been standing together, in support of Ukraine and against Russia's unprovoked, unwarranted, premeditated invasion.
CBS News foreign correspondent Chris Livesay joins us from Lviv in western Ukraine. Chris, just as you were coming on with me, I heard it sounded like air raid sirens or something in the background there. What can you tell us about that?
That is absolutely right. Those are air raid sirens. You can probably still hear them. This is the reality in Ukraine today. And bear in mind, we're in western Ukraine where there haven't been any immediate hostilities. So this just gives you a sense of how dangerous things are and how tense it is, even out here further out west.
Oh, and Chris, Russia is reportedly not living up to its ceasefire deal. It was supposed to allow safe passage for civilians in southeastern Ukraine. What can you tell us about what went wrong there?
Well, what went wrong is the Ukrainians accuse Russia of attacking the escape route, an escape route that was meant to evacuate Mariupol and the surrounding area of hundreds of thousands of beleaguered civilians. So that ceasefire, limited as it was, is effectively dead at this point.
Well, NATO Secretary General, Chris, is also accusing Moscow of using banned weapons. Can you tell us what evidence they have?
Well, I can't pretend to know all of the evidence they have, but I can tell you what we've seen, and that's some video evidence claiming to have captured cluster bombs going off in action. And the big concern about these weapons is it suggests that Vladimir Putin is becoming more and more frustrated and more desperate by the resistance of the Ukrainians, who have really shocked the world with their incredible resolve. Putin thought this would be over much quicker, and we're now more than a week into this. So the big concern is that he might continue to use diabolical weapons from his arsenal, not limited to cluster bombs, but things that we haven't even seen before. I mean, the biggest fear would be using something like a tactical nuclear weapon. That's, you know, a small scale nuke, not the kind of thing that would affect people outside of Ukraine, but nevertheless, a devastating weapon that would just take us into uncharted territory in warfare. And you just have to hope that somebody like Vladimir Putin, who has kids and has grandkids, wouldn't want to delve into those waters.
Yeah, well, Chris, as you mentioned, the desperation that many people are attributing to Vladimir Putin and the escalation that's resulted. I wonder how that's affecting refugees. The United Nations says more than 1.4 million people have already fled Ukraine. More than 1 million people are displaced within the country. There in Lviv, you are very close to the Polish border. What are people telling you as they come through? What are you seeing and hearing?
Yeah, Lviv, where I am, has become a gateway for this refugee crisis. The biggest humanitarian crisis in Europe in this century. So people here on their way out the door, heading for countries like Poland and Hungary and Slovakia. What we hear from them is a mixture of optimism because they're so impressed by what their military has accomplished, but as you can imagine, a lot of sadness as well. These are people who have had to flee their homes, and more often than not, it's mothers and children being separated from their husbands and fathers, because men of fighting age between 18 and 60 have been ordered to stay in Ukraine and fight. Although I have to say, you probably wouldn't have to order many of them to do that because there's just so much energy here to stand up to this invasion. We've talked to children who, having to text their family members back in their besieged hometowns with the same message every day, which is, are you still alive? So some heartbreaking stories coming out of here. Nevertheless, I have to say morale is high. You see Ukrainian flags all over the place. People here are convinced that they are going to beat Russia in this David and Goliath type of scenario.
Well, Chris, we are thinking about you and everybody out there. Stay safe.
Thank you.